Max Q Productions presents Calling All Stations, a novel, written and narrated by Gilles Messier. Chapter 3. Shore Leave. I was jolted awake by a screech like tearing metal. Glancing about in a daze, I found it to be only a gull alighting on the window. The storm had passed, leaving only a wisp of purple lingering on the horizon. The lighthouse was deathly still, with only a gentle sea breeze whistling through the stones. The door behind me hung ajar, the lock shattered, but I saw no sign of Father. I rose and followed a little stream of water trickling down the staircase until at last I reached the larder. It was a shambles, shelves of provisions laying toppled and smashed across the floor, rats swimming between waterlogged loaves of bread. The smashed prow of the motor launch jutted through the receiving door like the pale carcass of a shark. The storm had claimed many victims. Suddenly a frightful thought gripped me, and I wheeled about and scampered back up the stairs. But halfway up my step faltered, not because Father might be dead, but because he might be still alive. The welts from the previous day's thrashing were still raw. What savage punishment awaited me for last night's disobedience? For a moment I pondered escaping in the collapsible whaleboat, but it too had been smashed to matchsticks. So I mustered my courage and carried on up the stairs. To my simultaneous relief and dread, I found Father in his bedroom, though not as I expected him. He was dressed in a smart peacoat and cap, the pallor of his face much restored. It was an astonishing sight. Rarely had I seen Father out of his oilskins. I stood before him with downcast eyes, placing myself at his mercy. But so preoccupied was he with his dressing, it was some time before he addressed me. "Do you have dry clothes?" I blinked. "What, sorry, sir," I stammered. "Your clothes," Father repeated. "Any of them dry?" His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. Friendly, even. "No," I said, suddenly feeling my soaked jumper clinging to my skin like a clammy gray jellyfish. Said Father. "I'll have to make do." He reached into the cigar box where he kept his wages, pulled out a stack of notes, and slipped them into his pocketbook before striding out the door and down the stairs. Outside I heard the rumbling of an approaching motor launch. "Well, lads," said one of the workmen, glancing about the larder, "we've got our work cut out for us." "How long will it take?" said Father. "Oh, day at most," said the workman, "if you can stay ashore that long." The other men laughed. "And the flu?" said Father. "Not heard of a case for nearly a year," said the workman. Father made to board the waiting launch, but paused and glanced back at me. "Well," he said, "what are you standing there for?" I stood rooted to the spot, bewildered. Surely I misheard. But at Father's beckoning, I scurried forward and stepped aboard the launch. And so it was that after 2 long years, I once again set foot on dry land. Our arrival in Dundee was a moment I shall never forget. Worlds away from the grey desert just offshore, we sailed into a bristling jungle of masts and cargo cranes, a riot of sight and sound. Ships of every description crowded the docks, freighters, tankers, trawlers, tramp steamers, warships, flying the colors of every nation under the sun. And along the waterfront milled a bewildering parade of humanity, sailors, businessmen, soldiers, immigrants with threadbare suitcases, fishmongers in their ramshackle stalls, and longshoremen with greasy faces and shifty eyes. I stood in slack-jawed amazement, overwhelmed by the sheer spectacle of it all, until Father jerked me by the collar and hastened me along. Father ran his errands with military efficiency. I struggled to keep pace behind him, my arms piled high with his purchases. Fresh bread, bottles of paraffin, a new Aldous lamp, and even a fresh set of shirts and trousers for me. So excited was I barely felt the weight, and the afternoon flew past in a dizzying blur. By 4 o'clock, only one shop remained on the list, and Father veered off the high street down a dark, crooked alley. Ragged men huddled in the shadows, rattling tin cups as we walked by. They were like dolls from a toy store dustbin, arms and legs plucked out by some terrible child. Filthy rags that had once been smart khaki draped their bones. Only a brass button or a shred of patent leather spoke to their former glory. I gazed fearfully at these human skeletons, wondering why on earth Father had brought us here. Then I thought of that cold November night long ago, and Father in his own tattered uniform. I had long wondered why Father had chosen so bleak an exile as his vocation, but as we passed these shadows of men slowly fading into the cobblestones, I suddenly understood. He was one of the lucky ones. Father paused to drop a coin in a beggar's cup, and at last we reached the end of the alley. "Wait here," he said, ducking through a door marked Bell Telegraph Supplies. He emerged minutes later, tucking a small package into his pocket. And thus ended our day. We retired to an inn where I was treated to the luxury of a real meal. No rock-hard bread or salt pork warmed on a primus, but a hearty steak and kidney pie. Father sat in silence, nursing his whiskey as I marveled at the dark wood of the bar, the polished brass of the taps, the phalanx of dusty green bottles behind the barman. The shadowy hall was packed with all sorts of roguish-looking characters, and the smoky air buzzed with a dozen languages: French, Swedish, Dutch, Portuguese, and countless others I could not place. In the booth behind us, I heard some Scottish sailors talking. "Did you hear the Bell Rock went out last night, right middle of that gale?" "Aye, Dutch ship nearly botted on the rock from what I hear." "How the hell they get out of that mess?" "Our keeper got him on the wireless, guided him out, right in the nick of time, I hear." "Lucky bastards, that's some right sharp work from the keeper there." I turned to address the sailors, but a sharp glance from Father stopped me. I grinned ear to ear as I finished my meal, glowing with pride. That night, for the first time in 2 years, I slept in a warm, dry bed. We returned to the lighthouse early the next morning. As if in penance for last day's indulgence, I was put to work straight away. Though the bored workmen had restored the vital dynamo, it fell to me to patch up the rest of the storm's handiwork. I threw myself into these duties as never before, so invigorated was I by our brief shore leave. The better part of the day found me recalking the stones with lime and waterproofing the dynamo room with a fresh coat of pitch. Only when the sky, and my hands, were as black as the walls did I retire to my bed. Lighting my paraffin lamp, I discovered a strange object sitting on the shelf beside it, a small packet, no larger than a matchbox, wrapped in brown paper and twine. "What's this?" I wondered. Inspecting the package, I saw a single word scrawled across the paper in a spidery hand: Edward. I stared incredulously at the object for a long moment. A gift, I thought? Impossible. Father did not give gifts. 2 birthdays had already come and gone without any acknowledgement. Yet the package clearly bore my name. I hesitated for a moment before relenting and picking apart the wrappings. Inside lay a telegraph key, of a type I had never seen before. The brass arm bore an odd double-headed bakelite knob, such that with my thumb and forefinger I could swing it left and right. A brass plaque on the wooden base bore the image of a winged insect, and the words "Vibroplex Semi-Automatic Key." I turned the device over in my hands, not knowing what to make of it. Why would Father give me a telegraph key? The wireless already had one, and I was forbidden from using that. Unless... A rush like a bolt of electricity flashed through my head, and in my euphoric haze I dashed up the stairs to thank Father. Thankfully my senses returned before I reached the bedroom. Had he wanted thanks, he would have presented the gift himself. With Father it was always best to leave well enough alone. Returning to the larder, I doused my lamp and threw myself into bed. The dawn could not come soon enough. But the slumber swiftest sought is slowest gained, and it was hours before I finally drifted off to sleep. The next day I toiled as a man possessed, racing to complete my duties as quickly as possible. Skipping breakfast and tea, I sustained myself on the mere thought of the wondrous gift awaiting me that evening. I fidgeted impatiently as Father made his nightly inspection, praying I hadn't overlooked anything. But with a silent nod, Father released me, and I was up the stairs like a shot. Reaching the wireless room, I stopped and drew a deep breath, calming my racing heart. I entered humbly, reverently, as one would a chapel. I had faint memories of church with Mother and Father 1,000 years ago. I remembered being mesmerized by the ritual of it all, the sermons and hymns, the rising and sitting, the vicar carefully laying out the chalice and wafers. In this, my new sanctuary, I strove for the same ritual and piety, carefully throwing each switch in proper sequence, switching out the old key for my new vibroplex. With some experimentation, I divined how the clever little device worked. Tapping the key right produced a continuous tone or dash, while tapping it left unleashed a rapid-fire string of dots. With practice, I could send signals many times faster than with a regular key. When all was ready, I sat before the humming, glowing machinery, finger poised upon the key. Who to signal first, I thought. The whole world was at my fingertips. Where did I wish to travel? I sat before the wireless for an age, paralyzed by indecision. The possibilities were endless. In the end, I let fate decide. I swept the tuner randomly through the frequencies, wincing as patches of static blared in my ear. Occasionally a faint string of dots and dashes would whisper through, only to quickly fade away. It was some time before a clear signal broke through the noise. I scrambled down to jot down the letters. O-T-E-T-N-O-S-T-I-N-A. This was like no Morse I had ever heard. Some of the letters don't even exist in the alphabet. I kept listening, hoping to catch a familiar word, but I could make neither heads nor tails of it. Recalling that certain languages had their own unique alphabets, I plucked a book from the shelf and crossed out each language in turn: Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, Greek, before finally landing on the culprit: Russian. Sighing, I found a Russian dictionary and laboriously translated the message word by word. Reporting Black Army movements in the north. A soldier. My first wireless contact was a Russian soldier. What to say back, I wondered. I knew little of Russia. Long ago, Mother had told me stories of a vast land of perpetual winter peopled with hulking, hairy giants. Their king also had a funny name, I recalled. Tsar. It was a start. Good day. Long live the Tsar, I signaled. A few seconds later, I heard the response over the crackling static. Repeat message, comrade. I grinned ear to ear. A real Russian, I thought. I had so many questions, so many things to learn about this mysterious land and its people. Were the men really half bare? Did the Tsar live in a palace made of ice? What did he wear? What did he have for tea? Finally, a furious string of Morse blazed through my headphones so quickly I could barely keep pace. It took many minutes to translate the message. White Tsarist pig, we will hunt you down. How rude, I thought, twisting the dial. I decided I didn't much care for these Russians. Thankfully, many other lands remained for me to explore. Every night I opened my little window on the world, escaping my grey exile for a few pleasant hours. The ether hummed with countless signals, like an invisible web of telegraph lines stretching pole to pole. And along these humming lines, 1,000 lonely voices from far-off lands filtered into my ears. There was Marcel and Sven, merchant sailors whose freighters often plied these waters. We played battleship, X's and O's, or chess over the wireless, and chatted about all manner of things. Shipboard routine, their families back home, and daily life on a continent still shattered by war. Marcel, poor fellow, had lost his home to the Huns, and now lived aboard his ship. A life, I must admit, I secretly envied. Further afield was Lieutenant Arthur Stanley of the Royal Navy, whose signals I picked up all the way from India. The lieutenant was serving aboard a vessel carrying Indian athletes to the Olympiad, a great sporting event being held in Belgium that year. For 2 months I followed his voyage from Bombay to Suez, across the Mediterranean to Gibraltar, then finally up the Channel to Antwerp, pestering him all the while with endless questions about the exotic crown jewel of the empire. Every night, visions of steaming jungles, lush meandering rivers, towering mountains, and gleaming marble palaces were painted for me in strings of dots and dashes. In time, like a blind man, I learned to navigate this strange, sightless universe. My Morse, halting and awkward at first, became fluid and natural as speaking, and before long I ceased to hear the dots and dashes altogether. There were only voices, clear as if the speaker were standing in the same room. Every operator, I learned, had a unique way of signaling, his fist they called it, and before long I could recognize the sender as easily as hearing a friend's voice in a crowd. Lieutenant Stanley, for instance, had an inordinate fondness for Q codes, QRK for Do You Receive Me, QRL for Are You Busy, and so on. So fond, in fact, that although he was as English as you or I, his messages might well have been in Hindu. But soon I mastered even this strange argot, as easily as speaking the king's English. Not long ago the notion would have seemed ridiculous, but I suppose the same could be said of babes in the cradle, bombarded all around with the blooming, buzzing confusion we call speech. Given time, the mind can master just about anything. Sven's fist took the form of a strange stammer which slurred his letters and made him rather hard to follow. He ascribed his tremor to a case of Spanish disease he had contracted in Brest some years ago. Was this, I wondered, the same Spanish disease Father was always so frightened of? I hadn't noticed any shaking of his hands. Then again, I knew better than to look. Once I became a full citizen of this wireless realm, I found no shortage of new friends, but they were unfortunately as easily lost as gained. One evening, as Marcel's ship was sailing into Dundee, the Frenchman pestered me with questions on how to spend his shore leave, where to stay, where to eat, where to take in a good show. Having been only once ashore, I could hardly help him, but I tried my best. Then came the strangest of his requests. Où sont les meilleurs bordels? Where are the best? After looking up that word, I never spoke to Marcel again. But there were always other voices to choose from. I had only to wait and listen. But in the end, they were just voices, and like the ever-present damp that seeped through oilcloth and wool and into your very bones, a deep melancholy soon came over me. It had been 6 months since our brief sojourn to Dundee, and I had not set foot ashore since, nor, it seemed, did Father intend that I should. Doubtless he had hoped that the wireless would keep me satiated and out of trouble for all time. But the fact remained, I was marooned on this rock, my wireless sessions no more an escape than my books or buccaneering fantasies, an endless procession of picture postcards taunting me with visions of distant lands I would never see. Wish you were here. Before long, I ceased to transmit altogether. I just lay before the wireless, head buried in my arms, listening, waiting. For what? I did not know.